Hi, as many of you know, I'm Jeff Watts, and welcome. We do a series on YouTube, as many of you know, that varies between Friday Night Lives, which are heavy demonstration, to In the Studios, which we've been doing recently, as well as podcasts on some of my favorite books and other subjects that are more philosophical and inspirational. And a while back, I interviewed all of our instructors that have been with me for many, many years. Many of them, Eric's 19 years or so. Most are 12 plus years. And I had my father, or I actually interviewed my father, I don't know, maybe a year ago or so. And we realized that I hadn't been interviewed. So I decided to have my dad interview me and ask me some questions similar to the ones I asked them a while back. So that's what we're going to do. And this is my father, Robert Watts. He's over here. And,
pleasure, folks.
Yep. And he'll be just asking me some questions. I'll be talking a little bit about the history of the school and how things came about and all that kind of good stuff. So hopefully you enjoy, and we'll get started.
All right, we've come up with a few questions here to ask the man, and we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of this guy and find out where he came from and what he's all about. Probably the most important question I think probably that you ask any artist is, when did you decide that you wanted to be an artist, and what do you think was the triggering mechanism for that?
And I know you probably, and it's funny because when I grew up as a young kid, I was always kind of very wired visually, and I kind of knew that from probably the first time was first grade when I was held back in first grade, which is quite interesting, because I would do nothing but draw. So I would supposed to go do my math homework and my English homework, and then you could get a piece of paper and go and draw and doodle, and I would actually just go get the paper and go draw. And then the teacher would threaten me and try to get me to do things, and I wouldn't do it. I didn't really care. So that already kind of showed a slightly defiant side, which has worked, with me and against me over my life. But mostly just love to draw and love to immerse myself in that. And that was the first, probably really sign that's what I probably should be doing. And unfortunately, in the schools, like I've talked about before, they really don't know what to do with you when you're wired that way. Especially back then, and even now they don't. So they kind of treat you as if you have some kind of learning deficiency or learning issue, like almost being autistic or something. So anyway, that was my first time that I really recognized that I was probably going to be drawn. You guys probably recognize it too, I'm sure.
Yeah. In my own case, it was second grade. So it was about the same time, I think, that if you're going to be an artist, it usually rears its head pretty early.
Yeah.
Who do you think the most significant teacher that you've had?
Well, it's got to. There's been a bunch, but it's got to be split between you, obviously, and Glenn Orbick, who passed recently, who was my mentor. When you get to that awkward stage as a kid, I think when you have a father that's in the profession that you're going to go into, where it doesn't matter how close you are, because my dad and I, we've always had a close relationship, but and shared that bond of art, but we actually worked quite dramatically different, which is also I found really nice, that we're not like, there's a lot of father-sons that almost, the sons parrot the father almost in style.
That's true.
You see that quite a bit, with the exception of, say, like N.C. Wyeth, Jamie Wyeth, but that's
even there it was a big problem.
Yeah, and that was like just one family. That's one of the rarest families I think I've seen with that lineage of three great artists, one after another. But,
that's true.
But that being said, I think Glenn Orbick, being the guy I went to when I needed to find some anonymity or get away from the just being so connected with you, he was the guy that stepped in and actually, at the time I think he was in his mid-20s, kind of like at our school, where this lineage is carried on by young artists that have the energy and time to teach and get good enough to teach. And a lot of times that means you got to be pretty young before you get really either kids or families or get moving in certain directions. So Glenn was in his mid-20s at the time, and I was probably 18 at the time, maybe 18 going on 19. And so he was had just taken over for Fred Fixler, who has also passed not that long ago. And this was in the Riley method. So Frank Riley, being a famous instructor at the Art Students League, which you've heard us talk about in the videos online. We talk about it a lot. We'll do a podcast on him down the road. Eric and I probably, most likely. But he was in that lineage of Frank Riley. Mm-hmm. And Fred was the one that passed it to Glenn and Morgan Wessling. And then there came Glenn, and then I came into the picture with Glenn, and there were a lot of other guys there at the time that many of you will know, and later there was Jeremy Lipkin and Tony Pro and those guys. So that school produced an amazing legacy of really good artists. But Glenn was there was Glenn, there was Mark Westamo, there was a bunch of guys there at the time that were kind of students / teachers, kind of like at our school, where they were kind of carrying the torch and learning how to teach, but at the same time they were really students and they were just starting to work professionally. And that's kind of how our school was we mirrored that same system for cultivating its instructors. So you and him would be my two probably top influences as far as teachers.
I think you frequently need a voice outside of the family that really becomes the person that does the nuts and bolts instruction for a person. I think that if father was a doctor, I think some other doctor would be a much better mentor. Yeah,
just because there's a certain...
It just works better because you're objective, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that I think, not defiance, but you want to stand on your own 2 feet, and you're used to being told this and that, and you want to kind of prove that you can do it on your own. And that was the first time, and then later when I moved back in, we talked about this when we filmed you in the studio, was me being around all the time and you being around and me being able to ask you all the time for help. And that was phenomenal, but almost too good. It was like you need to get your own voice. You need to... so I had to kind of sever that, and that was
you do have
the
to
most...
row your own boat.
Yeah, that was the most awkward, hard thing I think I've done is not going to you for help all the time, and stuff.
Well, you've kind of answered this question in a way, was there anything else that was special about the school that you attended? I know that I had gone to Art Center and I thought that it was not the right school for you because I didn't think that the instruction was as fundamentally focused, and you really need that solid core. So what? Well, I think is there anything else about the school that we found for you?
Well, I mean, I remember when we went there, because I remember you and I had gone up and visited it on a weekend, and Fred was at the school with all of his students making him paint the school. It was a Sunday, and they were closed on Sundays. And had I not met him, I don't think I would have ever gone. So it was fortuitous that we just ran into him on an accident. But it was Thomas Blackshear who actually had recommended.
Yes,
because you were president of the Society of Illustrators.
Yeah,
and
at the time, yeah.
My dad would bring out these great illustrators, and I was just a young 18-year-old kid, and I would go to dinner with them. And I had just completely blown myself out in cycling and was... had to look for a new career option. Not that that was the most solid. I mean, I picked the most ridiculous things to try to make a living at, but...
Could have worked.
It could have, yeah, it could have.
Could have worked.
But it wasn't to be, so I had this big void in my life at the time, and I think that was very, very fortuitous, like I said, that Thomas had mentioned a school in LA that he said was producing the best people he'd ever seen.
None of us had ever heard of it.
No one had heard from it. He had come from the Chicago Art Institute, so you would think that he would say, hey, go to the Chicago Art Institute, but he did not. He said, hey, check out this little school. It's producing amazing people. And that's where I think he was talking about people like Morgan Wesleyan at the time, because I know Morgan was doing work in the industry that he was working in, and was probably seeing him doing,
that's probably right.
And that's probably was the main, in hindsight, that was probably who he was talking about, or what he was talking about. But you were able to talk to some of your old friends from Art Center, and they said, hey, there's this old guy out in the San Fernando Valley that's teaching these old skill sets. Art Center would have been a good fit had I wanted to do industrial design. I mean, that's probably the best industrial design school in the world.
Oh, it is, not unquestionable.
But when it comes to painting and drawing, it was a little too pricey, and it just didn't really seem like the fit for me because I needed a very intimate... I learned best by a more intimate environment, and the kind of shuffling you through in a 4-year type curriculum, university, where you get degrees.
It's not always the best thing.
Well, not for me. I needed more time to get good at head drawing.
I don't think it works that well for art. I really
don't.
Well, no,
yeah, I have my, as you've heard, you guys have all heard me banter back and forth. But again, when you're choosing schools, and when I got very fortunate and lucky to have you shepherding me in that direction, and actually then giving me the seal of approval to go there, because not a lot of parents would have said, yeah, go to this little hole in the wall out in the middle of nowhere, that it doesn't give degrees, and there's no definite...
We saw the work, though,
on
the
definitive
walls, and it was just mind-blowingly good.
Oh, yeah.
And you say, this has got to be the place to go.
I remember,
yeah,
within 2 seconds. Yeah, and then my mom and I went up and looked for places shortly after that, and by the time I found a place and moved up there, Fred retired. Between the time I saw him on that Sunday and a year later, and I had no idea that this was going to happen. I had gotten ready to go, and I had moved, and then I found out he was no longer teaching. So I showed up to school, and I just I got Glenn and those guys, and it turned out to be for me, very perfect because Glenn's slow, relaxed, kind of such a kind demeanor. He was such a amazing teacher. The fact that he just passed recently was just a travesty.
But he'll really be missed.
Yeah, I would not be here talking to you guys if it was not for him.
Well, I remember Jeff. He called us the first evening after he had gone to a class there and says, "Dad, I'm the worst person here."
I know no one believes me when I tell them that,
Just
but I remember that conversation
so
like
all
it
of
was
you
yesterday.
people out there, if you're listening to this, you know how good Jeff is now. That there's a ton of hope for you.
And
and the funniest. So hang in there and keep working.
Oh yeah,
at
the
it.
funniest thing was Quick Sketch, which is now probably one of my fortes, and I was the worst. That was the class I was calling after, was Quick Sketch.
Well,
I was just like, oh my God.
You worked laboriously, though. I remember going and seeing him do. He'd take pictures of quick sketches by all of these instructors and some good students as well, and he just copied and copied and copied and copied and copied relentlessly, and he got really good really fast. And so that's, like I was. You got to get moving really quick, and you got to move fast and hard. Don't move slow. What was your first professional job?
Oh God.
I can't even recall.
When I was at school, a lot of the guys like Morgan and Greg Pro, who's Tony Pro's brother, who's a really great guy and a good friend of mine back then, was working in the movie industry, and a lot of them would help shepherd a lot of the younger talent at the school, even though they were no longer at the school. It was kind of like a fraternity of sorts. I mean, they would keep tabs on the younger guys that were coming up, and a lot of them were just kind people, and they knew how hard it was to get in the industry. So I remember Greg Pro helped me get my first in-house job, which was absolutely the most horrifically stressful failure of a job. I went in that day to work.
Had those.
Well, I went in, and so hopefully you guys will enjoy, because everybody's gonna have these stories. But I went in and I thought I was pretty on top of it, and Greg's really vouched for me, and I got this job in-house to do sketch work for their movie poster conceptualization, because that was pre-Photoshop, so everyone was doing everything by hand, which was really fun to do. But I went in, and I just, at school, they didn't teach you really figure invention. They didn't teach you, we didn't have any classes in feature and facial expressions and things that to animate characters, and also drapery, like suits and how suits fit and drawing all that stuff. So I went in, and that was my first day, and I got there an hour and a half ahead of time, sat in the parking lot for 2 hours probably, sweat rings to my, down to my ankles. And I go in, and I sit in this little cubicle where this guy's playing like AC/DC heavy metal music next to me, doing cut up stuff, and I'm stuck in this corner. And on the mic I hear paging sketch artist Neil Adams. I'm working next to Neil Adams, and I'm like, I don't know how to. It was the longest 8 hours of my life. I couldn't do any. I mean, I didn't know how to do the freehand perspective. Guys walking. I mean, it was unbelievable. So stacks of drawings, and nothing got done. It was a day that felt like it was a year and a half long, and it did not go well. I did get paid, but it did not. I probably shouldn't have. It was just a bad, hard day, but it was very sobering. It made me later realize all the things when I went to go create our curriculum for our atelier, all the things I wish I had gotten but never got. I mean, these experiences help you to formulate game plans. And so I knew I needed to get better at figure invention. I knew I needed to learn how to do drapery, suits, contemporary drapery, not like classical drapery, like some, but seam lines and stylish, things. So storyboarding was one of my first jobs, and then Army of Darkness, which you helped me on.
Oh yes, I remember.
You bailed me out on that
Darkness.
nightmare.
I forgot all about that.
That was one of my first real fun jobs. Was the movie poster Army of Darkness. I got to do. I carried the torch from a couple other guys from our school that had been working on it, and I worked all the way up to the very finish, and then never ended up doing the finish on it. I would have liked to have gotten one finished movie poster. But it was hard to beat out Drew Struzan. It was hard to beat out.
Yeah, it would be.
There were some guys then that were just phenomenal, and I was kind of the, kind of the hired gun, like you always mentioned, that came in to do a cheap version of some guy's style that they didn't want to pay exorbitant amounts for, or
Yeah,
just
that stuff happens,
so
for sure.
But that's how I kind of segued my way into the profession, and that was my
Oh.
first jobs were in the entertainment industry, in concepting, visual development, storyboarding for the movie industry.
Your real career was still in the wings, and
Yeah.
that's what we're going to talk about next. Is what led you to start the school? I mean, why? Who would do that?
Well, we left LA, and a lot of those guys wrote me off because remember at the time, you were helping me in school, and it was a tough period because we were going through a recession at that time. I
Oh
remember.
yes, another
So
one.
you guys were helping me in school, and I was trying to get as much as I could, as fast as I could, and I was burning probably 15 classes a week and studying, I don't know, 20, 30 hours at home a week, so probably a 60-hour work week or something of studying, and to try to cram in as much as possible, not knowing how long the school was going to be there, because Fred had just left it and sold it, so we didn't know if it was going to collapse or what was going to happen, or whether or not how long I was going to get to stay in school. So it was very, how fast can you get through the school? I mean, basically is what it was. So when I left prematurely to come back down to San Diego, I would have liked to have stayed a little longer, and I did work with Mark Westermo for a while, and that was a good experience. It was hard, but it was a lot of movie production stuff. But I felt like I was starting to do storyboarding and things that were making me a sloppier artist. I wanted to be a craftsman, a fine art painter, ever since I was a little guy. So I felt like that was not the most prudent place to stay, so I moved back to San Diego to learn from you some of the stuff I did not get in school, which was like perspective, and we had no anatomy class. We had a lot of stuff. We were missing a lot of huge pieces of the puzzle now that I'm very happy to say, and this is not to toot our own horn, but our school has filled in a lot of those gaps because of that.
Oh yes, it has.
It has a strong anatomy presence, strong composition, strong picture making, features and facial expressions, drapery, all that stuff that I didn't get was later designed into the curriculum from necessity. So when I came back to San Diego, it was either I went to Palomar College, you remember this, and I taught I was 21 and I taught a summer session there, but I didn't have a degree. So I couldn't teach at the school because I had no teaching credentials. And so although I was way stronger than the people probably at the time that were teaching there, I did not have the experience base. I had a friend that had an acquaintance that had a small space in downtown San Diego, and the upstairs downtown wasn't very valuable. So he said, I can get you a little room for $125 a month. And so I decided I needed to keep training. I went around looking for schools, couldn't find any classes where the students were either not serious, had huge egos. The teachers weren't teaching. They were sipping coffee and talking theory. The models weren't modeling. They were goofing off because nobody in the class was serious. So it was the blind leading the blind, and it was a fiasco. It was crazy. So I couldn't handle that. So I thought, I'm going to rent a little place, try to rent a model and get a few people together and see if we can, at least I can continue training until I can get my portfolio put back together to move back up to LA to work in the movie industry.
It was the smallest school in the history of the world.
Oh my God.
You could
like a broom closet.
Change your mind in it.
It was
So
unbelievable.
small.
My wife, Krista, who is now, she was with me since the very beginning, and many of you, we should do an interview with her also. I hope she will. She's very quiet, very mellow, so it's very difficult to get her on camera. But if I can get her on camera one of these times, she is one of the biggest reasons why this school exists. So I want to give a shout out to her too when I talk about influences, because she's been hugely influential in this. So when she would come down to visit me, she couldn't even come into the classroom. I had to leave the classroom because you couldn't fit 6 people in there, and me and her. So it was really fun.
It was so small.
It was so tiny.
Oh,
so yeah, it was 6
wow.
people in a room. And we had about 12 people in the whole school, maybe 6 to 10 people in the whole school is how it started. And it was just friends that knew about my reputation of being able to draw well, but I wasn't a good teacher at the time. I was 22 years old. So I started the school to continue training, not with the idea of starting a school. I never had that intention. The intention was simply to continue training until I went back to working in the movie industry. And I wanted to learn from my dad, so I had to come back to San Diego. I couldn't find anything. So I lived at home, rented a little space, put up flyers at the local art store I still have them. And I think we're on semester number close to 100 now. So 100 3-month terms. is how many terms we've done, and so
Wow.
it's amazing. Coming up on
it's hard
20,
just to hear it,
coming up on
doesn't it?
25 years. If someone would have told me at that time, you're going to be teaching that much for the next 30, 25, 26 years, I probably would have passed out. But it's been a wonderful thing. So don't get me wrong. It's just the way we teach is incredibly, I don't know what you would call it. It's just, you jump on grenades, you're constantly in there working on demos, you're demoing every class, you're working on everybody's piece every class, you're working after, into break times and after hours on people's stuff. It's not, phoning it in and coming in and hanging out. It's a very
No,
intense.
it certainly is not.
Intense environment. That's what an atelier. And it's funny because I remember when it was Jeff Watts art instruction for like ever, and I couldn't even think of a name for the place. That's how young and naive I was. But later, I think when I came up with Atelier, Watts Atelier, because I had known about ateliers from Barg and different, throughout history, because the French atelier system was what was a lineage of the Riley method came from people going over and studying with Bouguereau, Bridgman went over and studied with Bouguereau. A number of artists went over and then came back to the Art Students League, and that's where Riley taught as a monitor for Bridgman, and later became one of the main guys there with a different system than Bridgman. But these were the guys that brought this system, kind of this atelier system, more back to the United States. And I think now, it's funny because I think we have the strongest atelier system in the world probably now, even though it originated obviously in French. It's a French word meaning studio environment. So anyway, when we named it Watts Atelier, no one was using atelier in their name. I mean, we were the only ones that I know of at the time.
Now everyone is.
And now it's, man, you could, it's a dime a dozen. But we were one of the first actually also at that time that we, I think it was 20 some years ago. So it was very early on that we became accredited by Art Renewal Center, ARC, which is an East Coast company. And if any of you are out there looking for schools, then go to Art Renewal Center and look for an atelier in your area, and they'll probably be able to help you out. They're a wonderful organization. But that was one of the first ones that really kind of put a seal of approval on our particular program, which was a fledgling program at the time, but now is pretty robust.
Yeah, I remember when you moved from the tiny room into a much bigger space across the hall. And it started to actually feel like a school at that point.
It was funny because
it made a big difference. I
that close to quitting every time, and then something would come into my life that would prevent me. And that was when Comic-Con actually had that space.
Yes.
And I was across from them in this little tiny space, but they were across from me.
That's how small Comic-Con
And I
was
looked at
then.
and I looked at it and I went, oh, that space is so big, and there's no way I could ever handle it. And I love that space, and it's awesome. And it's so funny when you think back, like. I remember jotting on a piece of paper my dream scenario for the school, and it was like 30 students and and it was so funny. It was just this ridiculous. It's humble. It's nice because you look back over the plateaus of building any entity, and what people normally see is where you're at now, and they see, oh, you've got this online school, and you've got all these students, and you've got this reputation, and you've got. And then only a handful of people, and Eric Gist, one of the ones that you guys have been watching on here, and also he's been with me 19 years, almost 20. He has seen every iteration. He's been with every room, except for the very first room. He came right after that. But he's been in every room with me, every move I've made. I think we've been in four or five different studios now. And he's watched the culmination of the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows and the trials and tribulations of running the thing. So it is neat to see something so humble turn into something, bigger. But it'll always have those humble roots, I think,
Yeah. Outside of it, don't mention me again. Who are your biggest influences?
Professionally,
which artists out there do you have you found
Nikolai Fetchin is obviously one of the ones contemporary-wise, not contemporary-wise, but now that my work probably most mirrors as far as the textural quality, the layering complexity, the broken color, the controlled chaos style of painting, which I find I gravitated towards mostly because I love other styles of painting, but a lot of them weren't very cryptic. They're very procedural. Like if you painted a very tight style, Bouguereau or something like, which is absolutely, he's the best of it. I think one of the best
Yes,
of
absolutely.
that style. But there's a certain point at which it's a technical style. It's not an intuitive style that requires, I think, going to a different level of intuition.
Which means people can easily replicate it.
Exactly, and also learn it. You get into people like Fetchin, and you start getting into more unorthodox
so easy.
styles of thinking and more philosophical undertones, more intuitive color, broken color. He'll pick up 5 or 6 colors on a palette knife and then put it down. There's no way you can premeditate what's going to happen, and then the only way you can do it is direct the next strokes after that from an intuitive level as to how they're going to knit together and create a story of abstraction that actually still reads representationally. And to me, that's what kind of led me. So he's a big influence. Frank Frazetta, who a lot of people probably wouldn't really think if they had seen my style. The power, the strength of his composition, the simplistic, his storytelling ability is very Hitchcock-like, very intuitive also, a very intuitive artist from many different levels. And his ability to manipulate anatomy. But then I go to people like Rockwell for his just consummate professionalism and consistency, and then you've got guys like Duveneck, which are a little bit off the cusp and all over the place, but awesome when they're on. Sargent for his surgical precision of layering and freshness. God, I mean, I could list 50 guys, but they range from comic guys to old inkers like Gibson and Cole and Booth and Wrightson and those guys, all the way up to the contemporary guys like me and Situ and Morgan and Lipkin and guys that can really push paint and are starting to kind of come up. Richard Schmid, another one. Yeah,
I think you've really hit something on the head there. That's why artists can take on so many different flavors and colors. Is because there's all of this wild menagerie of styles and approaches that every person will look at these things and remember some little piece of each one of those, but they remember different pieces than the other person does.
So there's no way to ever duplicate
and you
anybody.
can never. It's like the evolution of the school, kind of, and Comic-Con across the hall and everything. Just these seemingly dumb, chaotic accidents that all go together to form what you're going to actually become in the long haul. It's a very interesting process.
It's a mind bender.
When people ask you to give them some guidance as to how to get their career rolling, that's probably the most difficult part, because you know just how many of these crazy things where every intersection you come to, you make a turn left, turn right decision, and everybody makes a different one, and there are thousands of them. So it's like it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's maddening, and sometimes
it's a difficult thing.
But
the good part about it is there's always lots of hope that it's going to work. What are your present goals? Got any new ones?
Yeah, I'm a real goal-oriented person. I always have been since I was a little guy, whether it was in athletics or academics or whatever. I always had to have goals. I mean, you know that. You've watched me my whole life. I've been goal-driven. But, it's been a rough period for me. I mean, I've gone in and out of, like, the first, probably legitimate burnout that I've ever experienced in art was probably over the last couple of years. And it was tough because as you get a little older, you really don't have the luxury of burnout. Burnout, and I know it sounds odd, but I mean, there's burnouts that are so dramatic that you could just have to close up shop and that's it. But it didn't get to that. I mean, it just was more a matter of the impetus to paint, to create was kind of taken. I mean, I think it was the launch of the online school, actually, ironically enough, that did that one. That pushed me into the red zone further than I've ever been. And it was not an ideal scenario. So hopefully you guys that are online, I hope you cut me some slack on that first couple, couple hundred hours of content, because it was pretty, it was just a difficult period of my life when I was birthing that, and I had to go in, and it was really the professionalism that you taught me so much over the years, whether you realize it or not, but got me through that period, because I was, all I could do is go in and switch a switch and say, okay, it's time to be professional, even though your life's falling apart, right? And you just kind of go, okay, time to do your thing. And you really get to see, what level of skill or intuitiveness you're really at, because they always say that you default to your training in clutch situations. And I firmly believe that. So the goals now is to learn to work smarter, not harder. And I think pick my galleries a lot more intelligently, the shows that I'm going to put my work in and the time I'm going to spend on that, take less work and do higher quality work. Good
idea. Yeah.
Just good stuff. Getting older, getting more seasoned. So much of my first 20s and 30s were just about proving to yourself that you're good, and then trying to build some confidence with being good, and then you get humbled, and then you're trying to then just become a mature painter that loves the craft and holds on to that love of the craft that you got into it in the first place. And it's fleeting as life is beating on you and doing all kinds of crazy stuff to you, to try to maintain that. So I think a lot of what my goals now are more spiritual in nature than they are in artistic training, because I found that my technical proficiency, although there's always huge amounts of room for improvement, to get to that fetching level, to get to the levels of the people that I admire, they push way beyond the technical boundaries, and they go into a deeper space of understanding that resonates in their work, and that's the timeless quality I think that Sargent possesses, Sorolla possesses. Now, I'm not trying to compare myself to those people, but I think if you're in it as serious as I am, or any of the people that we train,
compare yourself to those people,
you're going to have to go there. I mean, that's what why do people still fly to the Musée d'Orsay or to the Uffizi to see Michelangelo's work, or Bernini or Sargent? It's because there's an intrinsic value or quality to it that is way beyond just technical proficiency. Technical proficiency is a given, but once you go there, then it's this book I'm going to do a podcast on. I won't non sequitur because I'm the king of that, but it's called Mastery, and it's George Leonard's mastery book, and he's an Aikido master, and he was saying in that book that the course of mastery there is no definitive time, and there is no he realized this when he became a black belt, and basically that was his right to start really learning the craft of Aikido. When most people think black belt means you've made it, it means you have the right now to learn it. It's not. And that takes years and years just to get to the point to have the ability to actually have the right to learn this craft. And it's a long. It's. But anyway, he talks about this stuff, and you just start realizing that that's kind of the way it goes. It's an interesting. So I think
sounds like a great goal, though. Really.
Yeah. Just the goal is to be more spiritual, to be more grounded,
less material, and a little bit more cosmic.
Why did you get into doing this in the first place? It's just Jerry Maguire. Do you remember when you loved the game? I mean, you do remember that, don't you? Before it was about the money and the this and the that. But I feel like that sometimes it's like, it's about the craft and the love of it. And I really do love the craft of painting and drawing. And there's some articles out me, and I'm just a guy who likes to paint, and that's about as true as a statement it's ever been.
Yeah, I think one thing that, now I don't know where, I've heard it from somewhere along the line, but someone said that that the most treasured possession you have in this world is your talent, your skill set, and like you said, when things get tough, you fall back on your training, because that is the one thing you own. It's the only thing.
It's really the only thing.
Really.
You start realizing that nothing in your life is set in stone. And these things that you think are so unflappable, so. Whether it's our school or anything, they're all...
Or your new Corvette.
Yeah, they're just one bad decision before
to non-existence.
Yeah, to non-existence.
Just vanishing from sight.
And that's the thing with the school, is the tears that it went through and the building process of making the decisions along the way. When I look back on thousands of decisions that had to be made in the proper context, at the proper time, in the proper way, I don't think I could duplicate the success of that school, or even tell you exactly how that has managed to get to where it's at.
Without being over-aggrandizing, it was obviously meant to happen.
That's where you start getting into this. You do start thinking a little bit more like divine guidance, this, that. Because I always think of when I was about to quit, the pivotal things that were put in my line of my trajectory of thought that prevented me from making other decisions, like going to work for DreamWorks with a mid $200,000 job when I'm living at home with my folks, flat broke, running a school that's not very enriched at the time, was more of a pain in the ass than it was hard.
Yeah.
And to turn down that job for a Hail Mary, or for for this pipe dream, so to speak. I'm going, I think this is a better decision. I'm going to, go fine art, make nothing, struggle for the next 10, 15 years, and see if I can make that work. And here you got this Rolls Royce position that's given to you. And
but that probably would have been like that longest 8 hours.
Oh, and that's the thing is, when I looked at it, I would have been working, I think, with Nathan Falks, who I have a huge amount of respect for him. great artists, but I think we would have been hired on El Dorado at the same time, and it would have been fun to work with him. It would have been fun to work with DreamWorks. It would have been fun to work in visual development, because there was a huge part of me that loves Frazetta and the fantasy art, and I used to do heavy metal covers and all that kind of stuff, and that's a part of me that a lot of people don't even know anything about, is this whole huge other, and I think most artists are like that. You see someone like Schmidt or you see someone like Morgan and you think that that's all they paint, and they have this huge range, but the marketplace wants you in this little box, so you end up putting yourself in a box, and sometimes, and you have to.
Yes, sir.
You know all too well what I'm talking about.
This is a complicated question. How has your current working style evolved? And where is it going? That's probably too. If you don't want to answer that that's okay. Unless you have something that comes to mind that.
Well, I did a blog post called like my artistic journey, and it talked a little. It showed some work from way back, from again the heavy metal cover stuff to the Clark Hewlings look to the I
remember that. Yeah.
I think that blog, if you're interested, you guys can go look at that. It does talk a little bit about the different periods I've gone through. So my period, I still feel like my style's completely changing a lot. It's starting to lay down in a.
Do you think it's going back to fetching again?
Yeah,
now?
A little bit. I kind of went too much in that vein for a while, and then I thought, okay, I had a show at the Fetchin Museum at the time where Fetchin's work was upstairs and mine was downstairs, and that was a very wonderful opportunity. And then I got to do a workshop at the time in his studio, and I was really so connected with him at that time, in so many different ways, and I was painting and I loved it and I liked the direction I was going. And then that hit right at that 2007, right when the bottom dropped. Like the week before that show was when Bush came on and said, our country's going to implode, and the brakes were just put on everything at that point. And that show falling on deaf ears and having a difficult time really shook my confidence with the style, and it shouldn't have. And it was kind of a mistake. I went away from that, and then my life started getting a little bit more fragmented at that time for other reasons, and I let it kind of get under my skin, and it kind of shook my confidence with that style. And that style is 100% confident style. You can't go in with trepidation and wonder. And
it seems like from this side of the perspective, from this side, is that now you're just utilizing the parts of Fetchin that you like and putting it in your paintings.
Yeah, I never wanted.
As opposed to trying to be another Fetchin.
Yeah, I never really. I'm a huge emulator, as everyone knows.
You're good at it too.
Yeah, I'm like a chameleon. It's been a gift and a curse, because if I look at a painter before I paint, I'll paint like that painter. So I can't have a painter out, even around me, or my paintings will look like that person almost immediately.
For a period of time, at least.
Yeah, and so, realizing how influential I am, which is great for learning proficiency in anything, but there's a time at which you have to leave that behind and become you. And that's the work that I need to do now, is becoming more authentic and being who I am.
Yeah, I see that happening too.
Yeah, it's hard, man. It's got to be the hardest thing I've ever had to learn to do. It far eclipses any technical
There's some
aspect.
magic point in every artist's life when they finally realize how they like to work. And say, oh, this is good. I like this. I'm going to do this. This is the way my stuff's probably going to look from now on, more or less.
Yeah,
and that's a nice. It's a nice spot to reach. Some reach it really early, and some it takes longer.
One of my premises behind when I was learning was that you would be, and I don't know where I learned this because I never read it anywhere, but it was just to try to emulate and push the boundaries of emulation absolutely as far and as long as you can before you have to commit. Mm-hmm. Because I felt like you said, I'll take 5% of this person, 20% of this person, that mix it all up in a blender, put my own twist on it, and I'll be a painter that's reminiscent of Fetchin, with the strength of Frazetta, with the color feel of Asaro, with the,
Yeah, and without getting too cosmic, your life is, and you are changing all the time too, so that you're saying, no, make that 17% instead of 20.
Yeah. But I think fine-tuning that.
It's real complicated to get to the point where you can do it.
Yeah, you almost have to push yourself so far to where you're so confused because you have so many influences, great influences, and you've spent so much time studying all of them that you just naturally burn out, which is where I feel like I'm at. And I knew that would happen at some point on a deep level, but I didn't know quite how it was going to feel or look. But I felt like the way I was pushing was unable to be maintained long term, just too intense. but I felt like if I could push it to that, play your edge right to the end, and then whatever, when you burn out, like a real burnout, not a fake burnout, but like the real deal, what'll be left is me, you know, after the pieces are put back together, whichever ones, but you got to blow the thing to smithereens and then piece it back together. And I think it's a dicey move because you could push it so far that you can't get it back, you know, like you could you could blow that thing to smithereens so much that you can't piece it back together. So there was this fine line where I thought, okay,
We've seen that happen to a couple of people.
Yeah, and I just thought, okay, this is I felt like that was what was going to happen and what was happening. But, and now I'm kind of in the middle of putting everything back together, but I'm putting it back together while I'm doing this online school, while I'm doing these. I mean, so it's weird. It's a weird feeling because you can't show that part of what's going on. All you can do is show the parts that are technically really sound. But the pieces that are missing right now are the pieces, as I'm trying to put these puzzle pieces back together to be the authentic me, that's the painter I always wanted to be. I'm in the middle of doing that while I'm trying to, you know, command authority, tell other people how to live their
Life is always busy.
It's interesting. So it's a really fascinating period and a fun one because, like, the online for me is my swan song. And I hate to say that because it sounds like it's over after that's done. But it's closing a 30-year period of a 45-year life. I mean, that's huge. I mean, it's the biggest part of my life has been in teaching, in help, you know, doing all this stuff. And now it's coming to kind of a closure of sorts. And I don't know what the next phase looks like. So for me, the online will guarantee that the information that we spent and the curriculum we spent building over the last 30 years or 25 years has some kind of
some legs.
A platform that will go forward way past us, you know, and that's something.
That's a nice feeling.
Yeah,
really.
I wanted that because I felt like for the longest time, only a handful of people were going to be able to take advantage of this little school that was so special, and you just happen to have to live in a 50-mile radius to be lucky enough to find out about it. And now with the internet, with technology, you now have the ability to reach so many people that it's a godsend. I mean, it really was the most amazing thing that's ever happened. Is the internet probably for that school.
What else do you enjoy doing besides art? We've talked art. We've talked art right down that proverbial whirlpool.
Love athletics, obviously. So, but that's also been as you get a little older, that's one area I'm so. In a way, I still watch the Tour de France religiously. I mean, I love their World Cup and soccer and the sports that I had an affinity for. Which actually, I'd love to learn any sport, but the amount of time it takes to get good at them is very similar to what it takes to get good at art. And so, as you get a little older, you can still kind of skate through on the old thousands of hours you put into a sport when you were young before you had to have a life. So I can still ride well and some. I mean, I still do things that you can see that old part of yourself that spent so long learning to balance a bike at a stoplight for 30 minutes while you're waiting for, or 10 minutes while you're waiting for a light. And I mean, just things that like balance things and things that you never forget. And it's juggling a soccer ball or dribbling comes back really fast. And if it wasn't for pulling a hammy or something because you're old, going out and running around or something, it's fun. I mean, so I think athletics is huge for me. I'd love to learn. I love traveling, adventure travel, which was the main impetus for fine art for me in the beginning, was I wanted to be able to travel and paint the things that I saw and share that with other people that weren't able to do that, or just that was one of the...
You're currently doing that.
Yeah, I'm still currently doing that. Mm-hmm. So, I think most of it is going to be, again, like I said, just trying to find...
Soccer, biking, and travel, huh?
Well, and yeah, any sport, but also I would like to learn some languages. I always wanted to learn an instrument, but I mean, I tried piano, but boy, that's a brutal one.
Any musical instrument.
Yeah, I mean, especially,
That's a serious deal.
So I think, if things can calm down a little bit, I'll probably venture. I just don't want to be so tunnel visioned on the art where I lose perspective with, because a lot of the people I admire, the artists that I am most influenced by, the one thing with the exception of a handful, they didn't always have great personal lives. They sacrificed a great deal of their personal lives for their art, and I think
that's probably true of most really successful people, regardless of what they're, whether it's entertainment,
well, that balance
business,
that's a
whatever.
Oh man, that's the balance. I think that's the art, is the art of like Robert Henri said. Great art is a great life lived. It's living at the highest level of your faculties at all times. That's all. You know, I mean,
That's all. That's all there is to it.
so I mean, that's
simple.
you know, Robert
Wow.
Henri was a great inspirational influence, and I'll be doing a podcast on him down the road because he's a biggie. But the Art Spirit, if you don't have that book, The Art Spirit by Robert Henri, it's a keeper. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is kind of you know, really enjoying teaching still. Kind of looking at some way to close that down at some point. You know, because you can't do trench warfare teaching forever. Not the 6 to 7 to 8 classes a week type thing. I don't know of many people that do what we do on a regular basis that are at the level we are. Most people just go out and work and do their thing. So
this school is very intense. So
it is, and it's special.
It's
It's special, but but yeah, it's been a really fun phase of my life. You know, it's been really good.
The last question is, and I've asked this of myself, and I won't bore you with what the answers to that are, but what would you tell yourself if you could reach back across time and space and say, don't do that, do this? You know, what do you think it would be? It's a pretty profound question. So, and it's kind of like asking someone, what's the best movie you ever made? You know, I mean, they probably don't have a real clear
I think
answer,
something
but
my wife's been teaching me lately, because she's actually studying spiritual psychology for her master's, and we kind of have this incredible spiritual connection we've had since we met. But she kind of has been working, she's been constantly trying to slow me down from day one, you know, like, and because she sees how fanatically how I burn. My burn rate is really, is hard. It's hard to be with someone that's that driven all the time.
Sure.
You know, so I think compassionate self-forgiveness, you know, would be what I would want to look back and have more of, is, you know, be compassionate.
Very interesting.
Self-forgiveness and compassion for yourself, and how hard it is, and just trying to do your best all the time, and know that everybody's doing the best they can. That's all you have to remember. They're doing the best they can with what they got, and that's all you have to remember, is everybody's doing the best that they can.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a real good one.
Yeah, so I think she's been teaching. I've been learning a lot, and that's, like I said, for me, bringing that spiritual component, or a deeper component of not just tech. I just don't want to train technical. I know so many technical wizards, you know, geniuses, but I want more than that. So I think I'd stretch back and go, okay, you need to be more compassionate with yourself, and you need to slow down and relax and smell the roses. It's not all, you know, when you do work towards something, stop for a second and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Especially if you're doing it from a good place, and it's heartfelt, and you're really giving it your all, you owe it to yourself to sit down and say, you know, that school didn't exist and it does now, and that's really cool, and it's helped a lot of people, including myself.
No, it has.
And it's hard to do a
absolutely.
win. It's hard to do a win-win. So every once in a while, you got to sit back and go, that's really cool. You know, it's just nice, and you're just nice, and it was a lot of work, and it's been great, and I hope it ends on a high note, and that I love doing it, and I've loved doing it, and I always will love huge components of it, and I will continue to do it for quite some time. So it's not like my I'm quitting tomorrow speech. It's just more phases of your life, and they ebb and flow, and it's time to watch that flow into something new. So I'm excited to see what comes.
Well, I think a lot of students out there that have already gone through the process and are moving on, and a lot of them that are just trying to get started, owe you a lot for making this thing happen.
Well,
and it, you know, I mean, there's just good quality institutions with a good heart. They're few and far between, you know, and this is I think I speak for everybody that teaches in this school, that
it's a special place. It really is.
It's a special place, and I think everybody actually does care.
Yeah. Well, that's what
that's rare these days.
Yeah, and that's what I try to tell people, is that sometimes I'll hear from people, you can't be answering the phone every day, and you can't be talking for an hour. But I mean, the fact that when people do call, they talk to the owner, and you get to talk to them for an hour is huge.
Yeah, that's rare.
Yeah, or someone on the online will have a problem. They'll call up, and I'm the one that answers, and or Krista's, responding, or Tom, and it's about that mom and pop, fabric that is so being lost in the Walmarts of today. Where it's just big fluffy fluff, and no substance.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think
You've done good.
Well, thanks, Dad. I appreciate you interviewing me.
Yeah, it's really
it's fun.
what, like all of our lives, you've got an interesting one. You know, there's with a lot of bends and turns in the road.
Well, another thing I didn't get to mention, and I'll end on this, but it's not just because my mom's here, but when you said influences, I never really get to comment on her and a huge influence on me. So my mom and dad probably got to be. I mean, it's just unbelievable how much influence you guys have had on me. So
I think if you're lucky in this world, I think your parents support you and try, and and don't. My parents were extremely good too, and I wanted to be an artist, and like you say, unheard of. Most people don't understand it, and they've got good reasons not to. And so you and I have both been lucky that parents were willing to go along with the program and let you try it.
Yeah, and
That's
if you're out there, and I'll end on this, but if you don't have parental support, just know your parents are doing the best they can. Like I said, they're not trying to hurt you; they're trying to help you. And unfortunately, art being such a odd career, although if you can think about it, the whole world is driven by visual people. I mean, it would not exist without them. All the movies you watch, the cars you drive, the houses you live in, the clothes you wear, everything that's
what your eye watch looks like.
Entertainment
everything.
is going to be designed by someone who can draw. And so why they don't get more credit and why people think you're going to starve, I have no idea. If you're poor at it, yeah, you'll have a hard time. But you would have a hard time as a doctor, you'd have a hard time as an athlete, you'd have a hard time with anything. You have to be good. That's the bottom line. And the main thing is just try to have fun, and hopefully you have a good support network. If you don't, maybe we can be that for you or help be that for you until you can prove that it is doable, and at which time, we will have done our job. So anyway, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it, and we'll be tuning in hopefully you'll be tuning in for other things, podcasts, Friday Night Lives, all that kind of good stuff. We'll have plenty more coming, and if you haven't checked out the onlines, go again. This is not a plug for it, but it is a really special thing. So maybe give it a shot. And if it doesn't work for you, there's no long-term commitment. You can always drop out, so it's no problem. But anyway, thanks for joining me, and thanks, Dad, for interviewing me.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we'll see you guys soon in another podcast or another interview or something of that sort. Thanks.